concept, or maybe it's changed.
Here's hoping.
This is really cool. This is part of a description of the piece that Jen sent to us. The resistance of the pencil, and anybody who's seen this work can get a sense of resistance there. The resistance of the pencil over the fibers of the page is what facilitates the enterprise. Generally, historically, across, here's my favorite part of this, across disciplines of math homework, poetry writing, shopping lists, personal letters, drafts of things, drawing. I have faith in the friction or glide of a sharp point over the page. And the mark is the evidence of an event. I'm really interested in the domestic aspects of that list and how resistance has to do with it. I'm really looking forward to this. Thank you both in advance of this conversation. Those of us in the room, let's put your hands together for them. And everybody from YouTube, you should be applauding. Thank you both.
Thanks, Al. Thank you so much.
Okay, so I'm gonna introduce Jen. Jen was born in California. She's an artist, a professor, curator with grounding interest in drawing as object and performance. Fluent in the histories of mark making, she defines drawing as an assertion of marks or the relic of the physical act of drawing. And we're going to discuss all this when we start the conversation. Jen is the recipient of many fellowships and awards, including the NIFA in printmaking, book arts, drawing, and Aldrich Radius Fellowship and the Air Gallery Fellowship. Her work and projects have been discussed in the New York Times, the Hartford Courant, the Brooklyn Rail, and many other reputable publications. The list, I mean, it's short, but still. Exhibitions include resistance movement in collaboration with Kelly O'Dempsey at the Kentler International Drawing Space, Flax Machine at Kansas State University, Timeless, the Art of Drawing at the Morris Museum, and Draw to Perform to in London. So this will give you a little bit, that's good?
That's
okay.
Good. Perfect.
I did my duty. So now we start talking.
Well, and I would like to introduce ETTY briefly. I met ETTY as an artist working in the New York area, but many, many years ago. And ETTY is also a curator and a writer about art and makes incredible installations that combine writing and paper and sculpture and just sit in a really fascinating place. And she reads a lot. So I'm just so happy that you were willing to come here and talk to me. So, and thank you, Al, and thank you, Jessica. And it's just such a treat to be here. It's awesome.
So I have to tell you, the first time I saw the new series of drawings were, they were loose, they were scattered, they weren't all of them, and it was in a studio. And when I came here and I looked at them on the walls, it just assumed a new life. And first of all, they're framed, but that's not only that, it's the relationship between them and the way you go along. Each of them invites you to engage with them, and then when you go along with them, they engage with each other. And the title of the show is Late for Revision, right?
Yes.
And there's a lot of editing. The idea of editing is both in writing, as we all know, whatever we do, we write. I mean, not just lists even lists for the supermarket we need to edit. But in writing, the writing process involves a lot of editing, and so does art. And
yes.
Those particular images involve a lot of editing. So if you can talk a little bit about that, about the idea of revision of each drawing and then the relationship between them.
Sure. So I'm going to preface my answer by pointing at the TV. This is these are some old drawings in a show. And my point is that my career historically has been massive, performative, performance-based charcoal drawings on walls and on huge tracts of paper. So this is like a very strong departure for me to be working with a pencil. We can talk about graphite versus charcoal a lot. It has a lot to do with what I wrote in that note to Jane and Al. But moving over to graphite and these small sheets of paper and this behavior that's like this versus, you know, what it takes to do that, it was sort of about this idea of taking on the persona of a writer and seeing what I could do with a pencil, which is a very much more familiar tool to most humans, versus like being in an art studio with charcoal making a drawing for a gallery. And like, what would it be to just write something? So it's like this performance of writing, and I spent a year making these drawings. I revised and revised and revised them. And when I talk about revising them, I shifted them and moved them and changed them, but I also was constantly reassessing what I was doing, because it is kind of a weird enterprise to find a space that feels like writing, but without words. So revision, I think it's such a like fascinating problem that everyone can relate to, because everything depends on when you stop revising, and like, how do you know? Like, how do you know? And I guess I also want to say that this project came out of that like early pandemic time of reading. I read so much, and I think a lot of my friends and colleagues also had that experience of just that weird thing when we were all at home and it was snowy, and I read so many novels. I just was like awash in great novels. And so I was thinking a lot about how writers use words as raw material, which I don't think is something I'd really thought that much about before. I thought of poets using words and language as raw material, but I thought of the novel as more of a vehicle to deliver a story. But I was reading these very complexly written novels that I think are probably very vogue right now, because like every novel I read is like that. But just thinking about how a writer makes so many decisions in the course of the beginning to the end of a novel, and skillfully carries you along on that trip. And I thought so much about, how do you revise something that's 500 pages long? Like, how do you revise 5 interlocking stories? And how do you do it successfully, especially? And so working on these little sheets of paper with a pencil, it was like this module of an idea of revising, where it's like, I will revise this until it does what it came to do. But that is hard. And that is like kind of a roller coaster ride. And yeah, there's a lot more to say, but
yeah. But so when you mentioned the large drawings that you did, like the performative, the act of the drawing, and these are so bodily, because you were also blindfolded, right? When you did those
Here's, we'll do another image. That's me. That's me in London, and there's a I often didn't. It was like a physical act. So the blindfold seems a little gimmicky, but was not a gimmick. It was like to enable me to like get into that exact moment where the charcoal touches the surface, right? And if you can see, you're completely distracted from that moment. But if you can't see, then all of your experience and everything just distills to that like actual like point of contact, which enables all of it. Yeah.
To the friction.
For sure.
Yes, the friction of the pen or the pencil on the. But what can you kind of think or share with us the difference between, the difference and similarity between those two processes of the big body blindfolding, you know, you
Yeah.
and the paper, and then those smaller scale
Yeah, they're really different.
drawings?
Yeah, they're really different. So, first of all, I made these at home, which was like totally a different thing to retire to. I just kind of shrunk. I felt unencumbered by any pressure of the art world. And as a result, I was sort of sitting in a chair with my pencil and my sheet of paper, and it literally could have been algebra homework. Like, that was the space of, like, I can do whatever I want. And, like, no one cares, and no one's paying attention, and I've never worked small with a pencil before, ever. So, so being at, there's just a really different headspace between, like, going to a studio, you know this, going to a studio and, like, unfurling all your gear and all the pressures of, like, trying to make things in mid-career when there are, you know, some interested parties, versus, like, sitting at home in a quiet room after finishing a novel and being like, now I'm going to do this weird thing that's... So the nuts and bolts of it were that if it got away from writing, it had to be like writing. It had to be this feeling of like, I'm writing something. But I'm an artist, so as soon as I did that, it would, and looked at it and started revising it, it would start to become a drawing because I'm an artist. So then it was like, well, you got to push it back to this space where it's really all about writing. Like, it can't become a picture. It can't become a picture. And so finding that little, I think somewhere I talked about gravity. I felt like there was this gravity that it wants to be drawing, and then there's this other gravity that it really wants a word or two. I mean, we joked about this. Like, what would happen if they had words in them? So just like constantly resisting the gravity of the two spaces and just like trying to figure out what happens in that like little sliver. Yeah, so yeah, it felt much more of book than of studio.
Right, right. So when you mentioned signature,
Yeah.
and signature is like a story, is a form of writing, flourish of the writing your name. I mean, there's no actual signature here. There are no words in your work at
Right.
all.
Why don't
It's
we put some on the TV
Yeah.
just in case people
Yeah,
are
yeah.
on? So this is, can I run through these a little like,
sure.
quickly? This is just like four of them.
Of course.
So this is a tiny, I'm going to call them drawings. This is a tiny drawing that's in the dining room of the Kelly Writers House. And this is probably the closest to writing that happened in this project. This is another one that's very close to just like straight ahead. I imagine that if you watched me do this, it would look like I was writing a letter to someone or something. Taking notes quickly in a lecture. This is, you know, right away starting to push the drawing back and forth. Like this one starts to have value and like value, grayscale value, and erasure and light. But if it started to become like a picture, it had to get more, I had to go back in, right? So
you push. You
yeah,
push back.
this is probably like, well, I like this one a lot. But yeah, you can see the weird struggle between picture, and then this is the last one of the group, and this is a bit larger, and this is literally where the project ends because it started to just be a drawing. And I found some cool new marks with graphite that I really liked, and I like couldn't hold them in, and it just had to end because now I'm just gonna be drawing. I don't think I'll ever get back. I'll never, oops, wrong. I'll never get back that feeling. That was from like early in the project where it was very tricky for me, tricky and interesting and engaging for me. Like, what is this thing? It's literally a sheet of paper this big, and it's like a number 2 pencil. It's the most like domestic of stuff. And I think, I just want to go back to Al's introduction. I do think that there's something that happens when you have a pencil and a sheet of paper and you are trying to solve a math problem or like do your Wordle or writing a note, like the thinking follows the contact. I think that contact starts a much more interesting, what's the word, like thinking process or not thinking process comes from this versus, you know, none of it works for me. None of it works for me until I'm touching the page. You know what I mean?
It's the physicality.
It's the
of it. It's
physicality.
the
Like
body.
something is accessed in my mind that allows me to do the thing I need to do, but it starts with the mark. Right? Like you can't, I have a 13-year-old who's in algebra, and you can't look over a kid's shoulder and explain to them how to do the problem. Like I cannot. But if I sit there and I like work at it for a minute, I'm like, oh, okay, and now I have words to help you understand what you're doing. But I don't when I'm just staring at it. I don't know if other people, you're nodding, Heidi. Other people have that experience. Yeah.
So, if you found similarities or kind of what you called, I think you called it baby marks, baby common marks that they're like a recurrent
Yeah.
language, mark language that you found between the
Right.
drawing writing.
Right. Oh, did we talk about signature? Because that's related to signature, I think.
Yes, it does, but it also relates to vocabulary.
Right.
So finding a vocabulary of between those
Yeah.
images.
Right. So there are 16 drawings here. I think there are 18 altogether. And, you know, I spent a year kind of like figuring out what I was doing, and there did emerge like some marks that would show up. And they show up from place to place in the drawings, and the more time you spend with them, the more you see them. And I think they're more interesting as movements of the hand than they are of like picture. There were just some things that my hand would do across drawings, and I don't know why, and I think that's so interesting. And I think that starts to get close to language, that if you have lots and lots of time to just like scratch away, these things start to show up. Yeah, I mean, I never wanted a mark that was far away from what would happen if I was drawing. Never. Writing. I never wanted a mark that would leave the realm of writing. So I guess you can kind of walk around and find them. It would be hard to talk about right now, but like the specific ones. But there's that loop in that drawing that is, it's like in like 5 or 6 of them. But again, it's not like thought out. It's not like a pictorial element. I guess that's what's important to me. It's not a pictorial element. It's like a thing I did. And then I did it again. And then a couple weeks later, oops, I did it again. And I think that's really, I just think it's really interesting. It's because I think about drawing and marks and pictures, and I don't think about it as writing until this project. And I think the signature comes into that because I think like a signature that you develop over time is probably the thing that is closest to writing becoming a picture. And as people get older, their signature sort of ceases to have recognizable letters in it, and it becomes this like cool glyph of who you are. So trying to find like that spirit.
It's who you are, but it's also flourishing of who you are.
It's flourishing. Flourish is a really, yes,
mean,
there's a lot of flourish happening in this
The
room.
signature.
It's dramatizing what's unreadable. It's you, but you dare anybody to know who the heck that signature belongs to.
Yeah. Dramatizing the unreadable. That is good.
It's a good one.
Yeah.
It's a good one. So, if we need to put your drawings into some sort of context, would you feel comfortable saying that it's within a semic writing kind of art, mark making
Okay.
domain where like put cytombly, for instance, there, which with a lot of differences, but I just, want to
Yeah.
put it into some sort of context. What do you think about that?
Yeah, are you familiar with ANTEMag writing?
Yeah, it's a big deal.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
It's kind of, I think Eddie is right. I think that's what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, like, so how would you do you have the
Yeah,
definition? I think the definition is useful.
I can go for the definition,
and
sure.
then I can respond.
So, asemic or asemic? How do you pronounce? Asemic, there you go,
Okay.
I'm wrong. Okay,
As
asemic.
in like semiotic.
Semiotic, yeah.
Like
So,
Asemic.
asemic makes sense to
Without
me.
No.
semiotics.
Absolutely. Means having no specific semantic content. That's what it means.
Asemic.
Asemic. He got it. With the non-specificity of asemic writing, there comes a vacuum of meaning which is left for the reader or viewer to fill in and interpret. All of this is similar to the way one would deduce meaning from an abstract work of art.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So
Text
so
and image.
in my life as a drawer, my work has been discussed in the context of asemic writing. And I was in a pretty cool show with some great drawers.
You mean the New York Times review?
Yes, it did. It had a
She
fabulous
sent
New
me
York
this
Times
and said, "Oh, maybe it's relevant." And I'm saying, oh, "Wait a second, they're writing about you."
review.
Let me read this. Let me read this.
Okay.
This is Jen for you. I mean, like, okay. So the exhibition curator. No, that's not what I want to say. Jennifer Wroblewski, "Slave to Love," from 2009. That's the title of her piece there. Of the drawing is an abstract charcoal drawing on paper, consists of swirling rhythmic lines produced while the artist was blindfolded, and we mentioned that before. Intuitive mark making is the basis of the art. The New Jersey-based Miss Wroblewski, aligning it more closely with the history of drawing than of writing.
Thank you. Yes.
The sensual, rhythmic quality of the lines also brings to mind Islamic calligraphy,
Yes.
especially writing in the Diwani script and elaborate, ornate, cursive writing of Arabic calligraphy. And this is so interesting. Did you have that in mind?
No.
No.
Okay, so that's it. I did not have that in mind.
But it does resemble.
Right, and
yes.
and that show was about writing and drawing, which I had like literally forgotten about until you sent me the article last night on asemic drawing, and I was like,
Forgot
oh
it's
wait,
just
I
the
have
New
a
York
whole.
Times.
No, but it was it was like a
No.
long time ago. I didn't forget the show, but I forgot how much the show was about writing and drawing, because that drawing, Slave to Love, that they compared to the Diwani text is like 6 feet tall and 15 feet wide. And the marks are like the full extension of my body. So to like decide that relates to writing, I mean, it's fine. It's not a problem, but it was definitely not. There's nothing about that act. It's just the visual maybe looks like a giant blown up version of something that was written.
In a way,
right?
it's
So
really-
for me,
Yeah.
so for me it's okay. You know, you make work and it's contextualized and it's fine. I just thought it was so peculiar. I just thought like you would be a giant. You would be a giant if that was like handwriting. So I guess the question of asemic text has come up, and I think it is probably what I'm doing. But I am a lot more interested in the history of drawing, and particularly, I think this work, I'm gazing off at it in the distance, this work and all the work I've ever made is really connected to a way of interpreting the world that I think is very early Renaissance, like Northern Renaissance. And I think that there's something about So we're talking about like cross contour and Schongauer and Juror and, you know, that
Yes.
world.
Yeah.
And I think that there's something really cool about the perceptual problem of taking in that many marks all at once. I think you can like literally feel your eyeballs like dilate when you have to deal with a juror drawing. And I think that the action of the hand making all those marks is interesting. It's like exciting. I mean, interesting is not the word. It's like incredibly exciting. How that many marks can organize into such a way that you have this spatial interlude on a sheet of paper is crazy to me. So whenever it goes to a scenic writing, I start to get a little like impinged. I just feel like it's a really tight conceptual sort of like collar on the work, where I'm like maybe more interested in just like a hand describing the world, like figuring out through the contact. Should we go to
Yes,
this?
please.
Okay.
I wanted to suggest.
So this morning, Etty and I were speaking last night, and all this last minute stuff came into our conversation. But I'm going to put up this slide that I used a lot teaching the actual work, because they're both in the print study room at the Met, so you can get them out side by side. And they're the same size, and they're like weirdly the same color. The one is Albrecht Juror from 1521. It's called Music. They call it Music Making Angels. I don't think it had a title. And the other one is a Cy Twombly etching called Note 1. And if you could get closer to that Cy Twombly etching, it's the loop. It's his sort of standard MO, that like looping thing. And so what I loved talking to students about when I was teaching more was like, what do they have in common and what do they not have in common? And for me, they have everything in common. They have like every single thing in common. It's just that one guy was working in 1521 and one guy was working in the 60s. And the hand is moving the exact same way, and the intensity is the same, and the scale is the same, and I feel like the mental commitment is the same. And it's really hard for me to feel that. I mean, of course, students are like, they have nothing to do with each other, but it's, you know, so I don't know how I could talk about this for hours and hours, but.
No, I think it's fascinating because most people would not see, I think, the connection, but to you, it's a very natural connection. And
Well,
I
it's
think
like a repetitive mark.
Yes.
It's this repetitive mark, and it's a sheet of paper in the world. Like, it couldn't be less / more significant, right? It's like a sheet of paper. I always feel that like our whole culture is made up of such sheets of paper, but it's not, you know, it's not a heart transplant. Like, you don't have to show up for it one day. Like, you know, it's this, so they're just these interludes that these people were having, and this is like the end result, but it's this. And I feel like there's like flourish and joy in this, right? And you know, those are like baby angels with wings playing harps. You know, there's nothing like serious happening in that picture. You know?
how does it relate to writing, the doer's drawing?
I think, well, that's a good question.
It's a really good question.
I mean, I think the scale of the mark.
The scale of the mark.
I just think the hand
The
movement. I mean, it's simple.
the
It's just the
intimacy.
physicality. Yeah, it's just,
intimacy.
it's literally right here.
It's the friction.
Yeah,
It's
and
the
it's the
friction.
speed. I think this is
Mhm.
happening quickly, and I think that's something very cool about this era of drawing. Like, I do believe that that hand was moving fast, and that there's just a way of understanding space and the page that it's not labored over, even though it's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful thing. It's quick.
But you know, when Dürer did those marks, he wanted to bring them together into a very specific meaning. The image, in a way, is like a word, right? Like
Yeah.
a real word. Like, you know, this is a dog, this is an angel, this is the sky, this is the...
Yes.
So, in a way, it kind of goes along with the writing, but in the idea of the meaning of the writing besides the form of the hand, which Cy Twombly is defying that.
He's the exact opposite side of the coin. Like, he's trying so hard to make something insignificant, but he's making it, and he's doing it, like, it's obviously significant to him. But he's like subverting the whole idea. He's trying to, but I think in his attempt to subvert the idea, he actually sort of strengthens the connection to like being an old master. And he probably doesn't want to, or didn't want to.
I don't know. I don't know.
I mean, when he got older,
Twombly,
he was a little more.
He was so much into the myths and the
Yes.
repetition and the you know, the letter, you know, all those.
But I think when he was young, he was sort of defiant and
Defiant,
subversive.
yeah.
But it doesn't work. Like, it can't work.
So the defiance here is very interesting. I think. Is there a defiance in your work too? Do you think there's a sort of defiance, or is it more
I think.
flow?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's defiance in my work, but I think about, you know, Cy Twombly made these great letters of resignation that are just this, and he calls them his letters of resignation. It's like, there's something so cool about, you don't even get to read it, you know? You don't even get to know. It's like the Bob Dylan quote, "I can't even touch the books you've read." Like, it's just like, my own, I'm going to write it however I want to write it. And I don't think I'm being defined in this work. I think this is all in relation to, like, the title of accemic writing. This is all, like, everything I'm saying relates to that relationship. And I don't think I'm doing anything conceptual about semantic thinking. I think I'm just performing what it would be to be a writer. But since I'm not a writer, the closest I can come, you know, I felt like you know, the theatricality of it was real. I mean, it was real. I had a chair and a space, and I was like, I'm going to bring it was theatrical. And
when you did the larger performative,
yeah.
you didn't have writing in mind at all, right? This was
No,
okay.
those were like much more relation to, right. So if juror if that Music Making Angels picture is like small, it's very small, and if all of that Northern Renaissance drawing that I love for a million reasons, I also love it because it orients the viewer spatially. It doesn't orient around the outside of the page or sort of in a graphic composition. The marks are all about like this, like you're this far away. So it's not tonal, it's like the tip of the nose is this part of the line. And I just think that's a really humane way of thinking about the world, and it's sort of still in a desert. Like, I don't think that's really part of our visual experience, that sensitivity to like the space between us, like portrayed in a picture. Lost my thought. What was I talking about? So I just really love that repetitive mark that creates this kind of space. And so my big, huge drawings were like more a comment on like the body and athleticism and like muscle memory and just like making that juror mark. But it's sort of funny. I mean, it's sort of a funny thing, like making it with like full, like a tennis player, right? It's like the same mark, and then again, and then again, and then again, and you like build up this web, and it's all to do with like a physical act in a space. And I still am not like entirely, I don't know why I made them, I don't know why I made them, but I really enjoyed making them. And I thought creating that complex space, like so huge, was a cool perceptual thing to do to people.
But those were really performative over time.
Yes.
I was witnessing one of them, and I believe you even had music in some of them, right?
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
so it was like an overall performance of someone, of those lines developing in front of your eyes while you're there.
Yeah.
It was very dramatic and very engaging. You couldn't get your eyes off it. It was performance. But here, when you go to those little ones, the intimacy of them, you can really still feel the performance, the act of making them from one to the other. And I really wanted to ask you, when I'm looking at each of them, about your choices of putting them on the wall this specific way. How did you, why did you select? I mean, I see differences in values. I see differences in weight. I see differences in some are closer to drawings and some are closer to writing. Like you said before, you mentioned that you push them on, you know, sometimes this way and sometimes that.
Yeah.
And I when I walk around and I get close to each of them, engages me, but I'm also very curious to know the dialogue between them. And if you can talk a little bit about that, it would be.
Yeah, I don't feel like they I don't feel like they are a series, like a chronological series, and I don't feel that they are. I hung them specifically to highlight if there's this small continuum of like a calligraphic signature kind of pencil mark, and then there's almost a drawing right here, and like almost a word right here, and you're in that space in between. So I tried to put them side by side with like kind of their opposites, so that you felt the tension maybe a little bit between those two spaces. That that second one in looks more like a laundry list than or a shopping list, because it's next to one that really is like really wanting to be a drawing. Like that is really wanting to be like a pleasing picture. Beauty is we don't want to derail with beauty, but beauty matters to me a lot. And I think beauty relates to our experience with what we've seen over time. And there's just something so beautiful about an accretion of marks. I mean, that's like my sweet spot for, you know, I think that when it really starts to like get close to beautiful, you have to like push it back to something familiar. So I guess that's really it. I mean, in terms of, it goes back to revising though, in this idea that each one was a project of its own. It turned into all these drawings, but every one of them was this problem to solve, and it was like, I am going to revise and edit this thing until it does something. And I never abandoned one. I never like threw one out. I never erased over one. I never flipped one over. I just was like, these writers can write this crazy novel and figure it out, and I'm going to figure out this like tiny sheet of paper. And I don't know, I think of them as like individual like things I did.
Individual.
Yeah. And so then they added up. I mean, there's a whole bunch of them, and they turn into a project as a group, but for me it's like one after another.
But doing this show, you did the curatorial process of another layer of editing, and that's what I was thinking about when I look at them framed, and they become something else, right? I mean,
well, and this is like a dream of a project for me. Like, this is the perfect setting, because I just want people to like corner of your eye, kind of. Jessica and I were talking about this, like a glance. Like I think they sort of like twinkle in a weird space, and I just like love that this is a house for people who haven't been here, and I'm looking at rooms through the doorways, and they're tucked in by the sofa and like next to the coffee table, and you know, they're kind of like peppered throughout the house, and it just felt appropriate and like kind of quiet, you know, and domestic. It feels very domestic. Back to what we were talking. There's something super domestic about this work that I've never done before.
It's very domestic, and you know, and this house is not just a regular house. It's a house with a lot of history. And we were talking before. about how this house was a chaplain's house and it became something else, and now it's for events, and those little drawings, writings, lists, I mean, they're also very layered, and they bring the sense of working over time, and somehow it kind of merges with the spirit of this house, and each of them has a wonderful breathing space around it, and it does look like each of them is an individual novel, but then together they become like a wonderful story that really connects to the space. And
well, I want to pick up on that, which is that in terms of the domestic, like I have very, very vivid memories of like my parents writing important things and feeling like that was like the goal, to have like some important things to write down. And how your house is just kind of full of like sheets of paper that are whatever, and I think that's part of this whole project is like, let's like really like hone in on like that feeling of like what I'm writing is really important. But it's like theatrical, because it's not. I mean, it's theatrical. But I think it connects with this house because it's sort of a lot of it. There's a lot of it, and that's what like living a life is. There's like a lot of that accumulates.
I love that. I love the domesticity and the lists, and I still write, my kids don't. But they do lists on the computer, and then they print or they text, but I still have to write, and even when you lose those lists, I mean, they're somehow imprinted in your head, and they're extension of you, and this is an extension of your head, an extension of you, like a signature, and it just shows on those walls. Beautiful. Should we open it to questions?
Of course. I'd love to talk about anything to do with it. Or here, yes.
Yes?
Yes, please.
Surprisingly, I have a question. So it's writing that doesn't signify. It doesn't do signification.
Yes.
And inspired by pandemic era novel reading, and novels are famously or infamously narrative. I mean, the greatest thing about a novel is not that it was written, but that it tells a story. So this is, thank you. This is just fantastic. I mean, what a weird inspiration. So I guess my question is this. When you talk about asemic writing or writing that doesn't signify, it asks the question, well, what is writing then? Because we think of writing as signification. Writing is not drawing. You don't want it to be drawing. You're resisting that. You want it to be writing. So we're left with the act of moving the pencil across a page, thereby redefining what writing is, pushing it away from signification, pushing it away from drawing. It's in this weird space. And that, if an artist said that, we'd say, that's a conceptual artist. But it's not, because your temperament is, I like beauty, I like domestic, I like TLC, I'm happy it's in a house, etc. So where the hell are you? That's just, you're trying to find this, it's a high wire act between and among defined spaces for art. Can you explain why you want to go to this impossible place?
A question I wouldn't have asked.
Well, it's really fun. It is really fun to isolate that. I was an English major here.
I remember well.
Like I am a reader and I love words and reading, and so it's really like it's real, my sort of admiration and love of words, things with a semantic underpinning, marks with a semantic underpinning. So I think there's something, I think that the person who doesn't talk, who lives inside me, is smarter and more conceptual. And I just don't present that way. I don't know how to present that way. I feel very quickly penned in by conceptual framing. I feel really just like, ugh. So I'm very happy if someone else wants to like do that for my work, it's fine, but I will never be that person. Because I think it always comes from action, and doesn't that make it sort of anti-conceptual? Like I think for me, it will always come from the action first. It doesn't come from thinking, and it doesn't come from testing an idea. Although maybe this was like a test of an idea, but I didn't set out to test an idea. I set out to embody, like literally just being like, what's an example? How did Kate Atkinson in A God in Ruin just like completely like viscerally challenge my brain with words? Like this, like jealousy, like a jealousy of these people like that wrote these books, and how do they do it, and how amazing that must be, and how good that must feel. And then being like, well, I could try it on a sheet of paper, you know? And it sounds silly, but I meant it. It was like this weird moment where I was like, oh, I can be jealous of them and admire their books, and I'll never be able to write. But I could sort of take on that puzzle on a sheet of paper because I am a drawer.
No, it's a great response to an impossible question. We're left trying to figure out, you don't want to stand anywhere because you're not ideological, you're not pedantic.
Okay.
You're
Right.
very warm.
Right.
Conceptual art gives you the heebie-jeebies because it's cold. You're
Yeah.
warm. You're also trying not to think, which is not very conceptual. Because you're trying to write rather than think. Even though here today, you're an amazing thinker. So you're a special
Oh.
kind of artist.
Yeah.
She's the real thing.
The real thing, yes, the real.
That
was not meant as a negative comment, meant
yeah.
as praise, you see.
No, I appreciate it. I think yeah. It's hard. I get lost in this a little bit.
You don't sound like
Yeah,
it.
okay. Yeah.
You don't sound lost at all.
Yeah,
Not
I
to
just
me.
think we can all relate to this. Everybody can relate to this, and you know that, and not charcoal. Your average bear has not made a charcoal drawing, right? But
Yeah.
everyone has like used a pencil on a sheet
Pencil.
of paper. So yeah.
I have a question about the word revision.
Okay.
At some point, you said you didn't do a lot of erasure. So
Oh,
is
there's-
revision?
In one of them, there's no erasure.
Oh,
well,
okay.
we could talk more about that. But
So
there's
it's like
erasure.
literally what is revision or erasing and adding? Is it changing?
Yes. Yeah, it's like moving things around, I think. And I thought a lot. We talked about this. I don't remember if we talked about this tonight, but writers who use words as raw material versus words as like a vehicle for storytelling. And mark is like it's a raw material that it has to get onto the page and then you move it. I mean, that to me is drawing. Like it gets on the page and then you kind of build with it, and so revision would be like shifting things and lightening things and reasserting other things. Whether or not it matters, there are not any deliberate marks in these drawings. There are not any it's not pictorial. Like there are no marks that are like, now I'm going to add this. It's more like, this needs a little more seriousness, or this needs a little more speed, or this part needs to be more clear, so I'll like get rid of what's behind it and just kind of bring it up a tiny bit. But it's never like, this needs a loop-de-loop. It's never that. It's like a feeling that has to get onto the page, and that's what's great about getting older, is sort of knowing how to do that, like knowing how to work the mark. But it's everything. Revising is everything, and I often would do this on the page, which right away is drawing, and it's like the air horn in my ear of like, now you're drawing, stop, stop, and then you can erase up from there. So they get more like that as the project continues, because I just couldn't resist once I started being in the graphite, which I never really worked with before. Once I learned how to like move it around in that way, it sort of was the death knell of the project, because then it's very tempting. It's very tempting to do that. How would that relate to revising in a novel? How does that relate? Like, how does that?
Well, I think, I'm not sure, but I think most novelists are using computers. So the writing over is deleting, and it's gone unless you're.
Oh, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's a big difference. I was thinking more of like, how does a writer know when that character is like not present enough versus let's like knock that one back a little in service of the story, or like that plot line is taking over and that will mess up the big reveal.
So
how
the
do we
conceptual part of the
how
revision.
do we like settle down that plot line so you're
Yeah.
really surprised on page 320 or whatever, and doing that with the marks, but not to an end. I mean, that's what's so weird about revision is like you don't know where you're going, like you don't know where it's going to end. So in a drawing, for me, that's easy because I like trust that it will get to an end, but I don't know what the end will look like, and I don't know, you know, it's just sort of at some point you'll look at it and it will like do an interesting thing in the room that it wasn't doing before, and I imagine that's what like your final draft would be.
So, I mean, just now you used the word look. Maybe you've used it earlier tonight, but I wasn't sure because I was just thinking, as you described making your work, you said when you start, it doesn't sound like you have a intention, except you're going to start and it's a physical act. And whatever it is your hand feels like doing, and then it happens. And I just wondered how soon into the process you make one gesture mark. Do you start looking then to see what your next one is, or is the hand doing it? But at a certain point you must start looking at what's happening, because that's when you're thinking it needs a little more, a little less, something. But there's like, there must be a moment that changes from physical gesture, impulse, feeling like doing it, and then what's happening, and what have I, not what have I done, but I don't know, just like what have I done? But you know, it's just like interesting to me because you're very specifically describe it as not having an intention to like draw something, or I don't know, just thinking about the process. And when do you start looking at what you've done and
Right. I mean, that definitely changes from drawing to drawing, but I think the way you described like starting is probably not the way I would describe starting, which is that I'm like placing myself in my chair with my drawing board and my pencil. Every mark, there's a very particular feeling of the pencil point on the page that is like hyper sensitive. It's like, that is the start for me. It's like, if I can't conjure that level of sensitivity where I'm literally like engaging with the fibers of the sheet of paper with the point of my pencil, then I can't, then I leave. I'm not drawing at that. You know, like that is the start, and that's what these drawings are really all about, is that point of contact, and there's not one mark in this place that's not of that level of feeling, because that more than anything is my goal. And I don't know why that matters so much to me, but that is like the place where I'm doing what I am here to do. So that kind of sets itself in motion. Like, that is such a cool feeling when it's that like precise and sensitive. And then I just can go with that and go with that. And like the graphite touches the paper in weird ways depending on how you're holding it and which way the paper is. And you can really, really feel it like right at that place. And then maybe at some point I'm like, okay, what have I done? And then it becomes a little, but that's always a very tricky moment when it's like leave the feeling and move to the revising. Like, but it's a feeling, and it's like kind of painful when I think about it now. It's kind of painful to like be like, okay, it's been enough. And now I have to do like analytical stuff. Yeah.
So how long does it take you? I mean, is there like a length of time? Like you, it sounds like you're in a sort of meditative state. Of
Oh, I hate
You hate
that.
it.
I hate when
You
people
hate
say that.
that.
No, it's just more
But,
of like a.
Sorry,
okay.
but I can't avoid it. Look,
Yeah.
you're saying that you feel it's like the pencil. I mean, it's physical. I don't mean anything that you're getting out
Right.
of body experience. I
Right.
mean actually the opposite. It's a very physical act of being with your paper and pencil at
Yes.
the moment.
Yes.
That's what I meant.
Right.
And nothing,
Well,
nothing,
yeah.
nothing else.
Like,
I promise. So, so you're in the state of action, right?
Yeah.
With you and the pencil, and you said that you're sitting.
yeah.
You're sitting.
Which I never, also knew. 'Cause that
Which
feels
you're
like-
sitting like how with like.
I have like a chair near my bookshelf, and I have a drawing board on my lap.
So you have
So
a
it's like a
drawing board.
clipboard. It's like a big clipboard, and I'm just.
And you're doing. And you.
Yeah, and it's like there are so many steps. Like the pencils have to be super sharp,
Yes.
and they have to be the right length, and they can't have broken because I forgot I broke one the night before. Like they have to be.
She's fanatic.
No, everything has to be exactly right, and there's a lot of preparation, and the erasers have to be
Yes.
in like. It's like it can't. It has to just glide. Like it's not
Yeah.
and I'm not picking on you.
No,
it's not a
no, it's
meditative
okay.
thing.
You can pick on me. You know
But it's
that.
like if I'm tired or distracted or not,
Yeah.
it's like a focused thing. And I think that's how every artist is. I think that's how every artist is. I imagine that's what it is to like write a great story is like all the conditions have to kind of get you to this place of real super focus, and then it suddenly becomes something totally different. Like it becomes something out of your control, and I don't want to say better, but like more expansive than what you could have decided to make, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because that's like what a medium is.
You're really minimizing. You're just doing something very, very basic. You know,
Yeah.
the pencil. It's
Yeah.
just you, the pencil and the paper, right?
Yeah.
So that is very, very focused. I mean,
Yeah.
that's really crystallizing the process in a very. That's why the sharpness of
Right.
the pencil and the way it glides, and it's very, very pristine. I don't know how to say it. Very raw and pristine. And
But I think that's only because the art
immediate.
world is not full of, the art world's not that full of drawings. I mean, there are a lot of drawings, but like, painters would talk about this stuff all day and it wouldn't even be a thing. Right? But like drawers, like a drawing is always like in service of some other thing, but like not mine. Mine are like little objects. Right? But painters talk about paint viscosity and color and like, you know, and so,
yeah.
Yeah,
Very
right.
fun.
Right. Right.
Okay. Good.
I have another question. I hope this is not annoying. Not the repetition of my questions. That's annoying separately, but this
Okay.
question particularly. So, a novelist comes out with a novel or a book of poems, and the date is 2021. It was written in 2020, and the biographer 40 years later will say, "Oh, this book was written during that pandemic that we went through,"
Yeah.
and there'll be some kind of attempt to do a biographical reading of that, particularly if people are getting sick in the novel.
Right.
You haven't used the word pandemic, but there's so many things at the edges of this. Not going to the studio, being at home, lots of domestic stuff. One imagines the kids were running around
Yes.
doing their at-home studying.
Yes.
So I'm not saying that, I'm not I'm not really asking for a biographical reading of this. It's not a biographical reading, it's a situational, social, societal reading of the TLC that's involved, the domestication, domesticality, whatever the word is, the smaller sheets, the sitting in a chair, not standing, not big dramatic.
Yeah.
So 40 years from now, when they're writing the big biography of the arc of your career,
Yeah.
will they say, "Oh, this was a moment clearly related somehow to that year and a half or two that we went through"?
Yeah, I mean, I actually know the answer to this. When I started making these, I realized that I have always wanted to make them, but I did not know that. And so for me, like, they were like pouring out of me, and that thing I was talking about was so easy to access. It was just like, I think I wanted to make these drawings forever. And so I think that, like, the pandemic and all the stuff you just mentioned really just created like a cool shelter, like a place of shelter where just no one was looking over my shoulder. Like, every single thing stopped. So it was not a response to that at all. Not at all. It was much more like this door opened of like, oh, I could literally try anything. I mean, we all had that. Like, I could do anything I want right now because we're all just locked in our houses. And so for me, I mean, these came out of, I'll just say it. I started drawing the radiators in my house, which we bought our house 5 years ago, and I've been looking at my radiators the whole 5 years, and they're historical radiators with like flourish and weird tops and like scroll work in them, and radiators are like quite geometric and mathematical, and I was like, well, I guess I finally have the time to like sit with these radiators, and that was like spatial analysis of an object like I would teach in foundation drawing, and it's so fun and very hard, and it's just hard to do, and just feels amazing, right? You like feel all your perception working really hard to like square the structure with the space, with the line quality. It's just a puzzle. And that like right away kind of launched me into this. It was like that was happening while I was reading the novels and like pondering writers. So for me, it's just like, oh my God, I was so lucky that the pandemic happened for my drawing, not for, all the awfulness. But yeah.
So it's an opportunity, but it also gave you the freedom to do something without worrying about it.
Yeah, because you can't not worry a little. Like, you can't, we're all in each other's business, right? In like the art world. I mean, as friends we are. Everybody kind of wants to know what people are working on and what they're doing, and you end up sort of I'm not good at like keeping stuff secret because I don't want to talk about, it's just so, it was such a peaceful time, and so yeah, I think I wanted to make these forever.
I've got one from online here, from YouTube. Margaret Brinkerhoff asks, do the different marks remind you or lead you to a certain emotion?
Oh, hi Maggie. They're very emotional, right? We've talked about this. Like, they are emotions. Yeah, and it's like, it's a joy. It's like just joy, 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 joy. That is like what that mark is to me. So yeah, and I didn't really let anything else come into it. It was like, I am a novelist now. Like, yeah.
I have a question.
Okay.
Are you, like, is this something you're going to continue working in this format?
No. I actually, I left my thing. So that is in the dining room, and that was really the end. And I tried a little bit right before I brought the work. I was like, I wonder, because every artist does this. I wonder if I should make one more. and it's like, it just became, I just discovered way too much about this scale and what happens at this scale and what graphite does at this scale and like what I can do at this scale, that now it just would be weird if it was still about writing. Like it just wouldn't.
You did.
It's like the moment's over. Yeah,
It's
yeah,
finished.
yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
Interesting.
Really beautiful.
Thank you.
This is the one. Yeah.
It's in the dining room.
It's so
Yeah. It's way
fabulous.
back
And
there.
individual items?
No, they're just numbered. They're all called late for revision.
Revision 1 was.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Do you feel like if you printed them, if a catalog was made of them, whatever, that would be okay for you?
Oh, of course. Yeah, I mean, they would pain me that they wouldn't look like themselves in
Well,
reproduction.
that's what I was asking.
Yeah, I mean, it's always so
Any
hard.
reproduction is going to lose the resistance we were talking about.
Yeah, yeah, and that, I mean, the stuff of artwork is what we respond to. I think we respond to like the picture, but we don't. We respond to like the material of it. I'm sure that that's true. And we sort of stay familiar with what it is by like Instagram or whatever, but that's not what you respond to. So yeah, it's like this is their moment. Like this is, you get to like look at them. Yeah, but you know.
And paper? Did you just use 8 bytes?
Oh no, these are on the only paper I draw on, including the really, really big ones. It's called Reeves BFK. It's a printmaking paper. It's the only paper it's the one. It's the one.
Braggy? It's got a lot of braggy.
It's real cottony and how would you like? You can pull a mark out of it like it's like butter. It's like you can erase a mark right out of it, and it's pretty substantial. It feels like fabric.
It's for printmaking, right?
It's for printmaking.
Yeah.
It's for printmaking. It doesn't have any of that like crunchiness of paper. It's just like soft, but it's for me mostly it's the erasure. It's like you can just, and it's pretty rough. Is that warm press or cold
Yeah,
press?
I
That's
think
warm
so,
press,
yeah.
I think.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have that slippery surface. It's like fabric. Yeah. And so they're just ripped into. I just got sheets of them and, ripped them into sizes. And the framing helped a lot. Actually, that's like a big part of
It's
part of the
amazing.
curating is that
Yeah.
if they were custom framed, they'd all be different sizes. So like syncing them into just like a frame that's the same size is part of what makes them read like a group, because they're really all over the place and they're quite crooked and some of the edges.
Might we ask each of you to offer a final thought? One after the other? Would that be okay?
Yeah. Go.
So my final thought is just that this has been like really a highlight for me. Like this has been an incredible project, and to have connected with you right when it started, we are in touch, but that was very like kismet-y that there was a place for them. So that means a lot to an artist.
So you knew we decided to do this and then you made them.
I was already sort of fussing around with the idea. Fussing around is the wrong word, but I had maybe made a couple of them and was really into the idea, but I had it was unmoored. It was completely unmoored. So this idea of like, not only would they have a destination, but that it would be this destination where I assume the people who come across them have an interest in like words and writing.
Yes.
I mean, it was just like so perfect, and to have ETTY with me along the way to like talk about it and figure it out has just been incredible. So I'm just really grateful and thankful.
It's lovely.
And I'm thankful for her that she invited me here. Because as I started saying at the beginning, I saw them scattered around in a studio, in a room, and not on the walls. And the minute I entered this house and I saw the work, it just feels so natural here. It's as if it's born in this place. It's so, it kind of belongs to the house, which is a big compliment, I think.
Yeah.
So.
How long, Jessica, is this? I should get How long is this staying up?
Through the start of March, so basically.
Okay.
Ahead of spring break.
So those of you who are watching on YouTube, come to Philadelphia to 3805. Oh, seriously. Or you're already in Philly, come to 3805 Locust Walk this next month and see these amazing pieces before they go away. I also want to remind people who are watching to look for the recording, which we will put up, and we'll make sure that both of you get the link so you can pass that around. And finally, I'll ask Zelda to keep the live feed going for another few minutes so that those of you who want to leave comments can do it in the chat, in the comment feed of YouTube, and we will collect them. Zelda, can we somehow grab them and send them to Jen so that you will have all the comments that have been made?
Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica, for making this thing happen. I think you were literally here when Jen came and hung the stuff.
Yeah.
Etty, thank you so much for coming to the Writer's House. And Jen, what a treat. I had no idea this was going to be so fabulous and fun when we first started about it. Thank you. Let's put our hands together for these folks. Zelda, turn the sound off. That was great.
Oh my gosh, that was